Zero Foxtrot does not profess to share or promote the opinions and beliefs expressed by show host or guests. The Stay Zero podcast was created to provide a platform for servicemen and women to share their stories. Due to the nature of this podcast, sensitive topics will arise. Conversations about combat, PTSD, drug use, and other such subjects will occur. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the Stay Zero podcast. I have Dave Hughes with me today. And Dave is Canadian, and he fought in the Rhodesian Army back in 1978 against the British government. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
You were like an anti-colonialist before the baristas with Word of the Day toilet paper found it. the OG, real deal.
I'm one of many, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, at least 300, right? I think you said you had
300 Americans, we think, served in the Rhodesian security forces during the Bush War, mostly in the latter parts of it, from 75, well, actually 70 to 80, roughly. We think there's about 300, possibly 50 Canadians as well.
Tell me about the decision to do that. How old were you when you made that decision?
We'll back it up a little bit. At 18 years of age, 1 week out of finishing high school, I joined York Regional Police as a young police cadet, 18 years old. I barely made the height and weight. Well, I made the height 5'9" requirement, but the weight requirement was 165 pounds, and I was 160. But they let me in anyhow.
That's interesting as a weight requirement.
Yeah, height and weight requirement.
They didn't have donuts up there? The cops were having a hard time?
Give it time. So I joined York Regional Police, and approximately a year later, they sent me to the Ontario Police College in Aylmer, which is where every policeman in Ontario has to go to become qualified to be a police officer in Ontario. Back then you did an A part and a B part, total of 12 weeks. Mm. And in November of 1976, our class, filed into class on a Monday morning, and we had this Windsor police sergeant who was a legend in the Windsor police force circles. His name was Carl Moffat, 6'5", 265 pounds, not an ounce of fat on that man's frame whatsoever, wore cowboy boots, and this is back in the era of Sam Brown and cross-strap uniforms.
Okay.
So he was he was a renegade, and strong as an ox. There's a story of him trying to get an 870 shotgun out of the electric lock in the cruiser, and the solenoid wasn't working, so he literally bent the barrel of the shotgun trying to yank it out of the solenoid lock. Wow. Oh man, he was strong as an ox. Anyhow, Carl's sitting at his desk with his cowboy boots up on the desk, reading the Windsor Star newspaper. Front page story is about a young Canadian by the name of Matthew Charles Lamb, who had been killed serving in the Rhodesian Army. And the backstory to Matthew Charles Lamb was that as a 16-year-old boy in 1965, he suffered a schizoid break with reality and went on a shooting spree in Windsor, and he shot 4 people with his uncle's shotgun, killed 2 of them, and grievously wounded 2 more. Matt was arrested. He was 16 years of age, and he was charged with capital murder, which in Canada at the time meant should he have been if he was convicted, he would be sentenced to hang.
Wow.
So at 16 years of age. Anyhow, Carl is reading this article, and he's got this frown on his face like, man, you can tell he's pissed. And so he throws the paper down on his desk, and he's like, what's the matter with these Rhodesians? Don't they know who they've hired? Well, it just so happened that one of my classmates, Ken Greenwood, was a Peel Regional Police officer, and Ken had just immigrated to Canada from serving in Rhodesia's police force, which was called the British South Africa Police Force. And it had its origins in the creation of the British South Africa Company, which had received a charter from Queen Victoria in the late 1800s to take over what is now known as Zimbabwe. mining and mineral concession rights, that sort of thing, in order to expand the British Empire's influence and I suppose their financial well-being as well.
So that was their interest in Rhodesia, were the mines.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mining, mineral. I don't think they truly understood just how great an agricultural prize it was, but eventually they did.
Yeah.
The fabric of this shirt, which is my issue shirt from the Rhodesian conflict, cool. Serving in the Rhodesian Army, was made from cotton grown in Rhodesia, and the fabric is like it's still like it's brand new.
Yeah, it looks good.
I got a couple of pinholes in the back where some larvae or bugs got in there and had a little bit of a feast, but otherwise it is still super. Like if they made garments like this nowadays, boy.
Yeah, they don't. No.
So Ken Greenwood pipes up and he said to Carl Moffat, he said, well, you know, that country's under UN sanctions. They don't have the ability to reach out and vet people who come to serve in their army. So they got into a bit of a lively discussion, tete-a-tete back and forth in the class. And it just so happened that Ken's room was right beside my room, and there were 3 or 4 other expats, they called them, experts, who had served in places like one of them had been a Royal Ulster Constabulary Inspector, another one had been a Royal Marine, another one was a London Metropolitan Bobby, and they used to gather at Ken's room after class and drink, you know, which was forbidden, and my room's right beside them, so they would invite me in, and they'd be like, "How old are you?" I'm like 19. And these guys are all in their 30s, you know, some of them pushing maybe closer to 40. Worldly guys, you know, they'd been everywhere, seen everything. And so I was in awe of them. And they used to say, "You're too young to be a policeman. You should go and join the Rhodesian Army or the BSAP." And so that was 1976. And in the ensuing 2 years, I began to pay attention in the news media about what was going on in Rhodesia. And eventually, after watching the streetlights go on and off in Schaumburg, Ontario, in Patrol Area 122, which is about as rural as you're going to find anywhere in Canada, and rounding up stray cows, I began to realize that they were right.
Yeah.
So in December of 1978, I quit York Regional Police. And by January of 1979, I had flown to Rhodesia with my brother. And I ended up joining the Rhodesian Army. And my brother ended up coming back to Canada the day after we landed.
Really? Why did he leave? They only needed one?
You know, it's hard to say. My brother had no previous military or police background. He was 7-8 years older than me. I think in a way he kind of thought he had to look after his little brother, that kind of thing. But at the same time, like many Canadians during the Vietnam War era, which he would have been old enough to serve in, guys would get drunked up on the weekends and they'd drive down to the recruiting office in Buffalo, which is right an hour's drive, hour and a half's drive from where we lived. And they'd show up at the recruiting office and, you know, sign on the dotted line, come back home to Canada, get sober, and go, "Oh,
never mind."
We did have one individual from the small town I grew up in, Nobleton, Ontario, Doug Ransom, who actually did join the U.S. Marine Corps. And he served as a combat photographer and was in the very first landings of the U.S. Marine Corps in Vietnam when they came ashore on landing craft, totally unopposed. And a number of his photos are in the U.S. Marine Corps records or publications showing these landings. And Doug was there taking photographs. Later on, when he finished his tour or his service in the Marine Corps, he came back to Canada and had a 30-plus-year career in Metropolitan Toronto Police Force before he retired. Still alive. I'm in contact with him occasionally on Facebook, but there was one guy from our town that actually did it.
Yeah.
And still alive to talk about it.
What was the impression that you had of the Vietnam War? What were you... what do you remember
I was
about that?
A young adolescent. It was in the news all the time.
Did you pay much attention to it?
Well, my father, who was pretty conservative, had been a pilot in World War II in the Royal Canadian Air Force, spent 3 years in Great Britain. He was like, oh, those commie protesters, they're all being influenced by the communist version of the United States and that sort of thing. So I kind of paid attention through my father.
Mm-hmm.
And I was old enough to start reading news and paying attention to it, but I was too young to actually serve, and I really had no thought of doing that.
Sure, you'd be like 10, something like that.
Born in
10 and younger.
I would be between 10 and 15 years of age, 10 to 16 years of age before the pullout of the United States from Vietnam. Yeah, so certainly a hot topic, but
sure.
We didn't know very little. There was very little knowledge of Canadians who had gone to serve in the U.S. forces, of which I understand there were approximately 40,000. And we have a monument in Windsor, Ontario called the North Wall. And there are about 500 names of Canadians who were killed in action serving in the U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. So, yeah.
What was your impression? Did you know what to expect when you got to Rhodesia? What was the infrastructure and the people or the culture? What did you notice? Through
my friendship with Ken Greenwood, Ken gave me lots of good information about what to expect, where to go, who to see. Ken thought that I should try out for the BSAP. And
what is that?
The British South Africa Police Force. They would be, in Canada, they would be equivalent to our RCMP in Canada, which is a national police force.
Okay.
And that's what they had in Rhodesia at the time. It was a national police force. There were no municipal police forces or anything.
But it was the British police force.
Well, it was called the British South Africa Police Force because it evolved out of the British South Africa Company.
Okay.
That was given the charter to create Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe.
But it was in support of Rhodesia.
Yes. Yeah, even though, people get confused because the British South Africa Police Force, you think, well, South Africa, which nothing to do with South Africa.
Right, yeah.
So Ken thought that I should do that, but I had been given a couple of books. There was actually a lobbying group in Toronto called the Friends of Rhodesia Society. It was run by a librarian by the name of Jean Housen. She was a school librarian in the Toronto District Public School Board. A very interesting lady. She was actually given a civilian award by the Rhodesian government later on, a gazetted award. I can't remember what it was called. For her role in trying to publicize the Rhodesian side of the conflict, which of course had, was widely perceived as being a white minority, white supremacist group of people lording it over the majority African population.
Really? The Rhodesian side was perceived that way?
Well, the world viewed Rhodesia as that.
Okay.
Because in November 11th, 1965, it was actually called the British colony of Southern Rhodesia, and they declared their unilateral declaration of independence and technically rebelled against Great Britain. And that was what led to the beginning of the outright hostilities and conflict that eventually created what was known as the Bush War.
Okay.
From 1965 to 1980.
Okay.
So,
but you didn't join them, right?
No, I had been given a really good book called Contact, and in that book it listed all the names and numbers and units of people who had been killed in active service so far. And when I was going through that, I noticed there was one group that had a tiny fraction of the killed in active service statistics, and that was the Rhodesian Special Air Service Regiment. So I started reading up a bit about it. I wasn't really much into military stuff. I'm a policeman at the time. I was competing as what they called PPC revolver shooting competition, and I was doing that at the time for the York Regional Police Revolver Club. But I didn't really know much about soldiering at all. And so I thought, I looked at other units, like the British South Africa Police Force was heavily overrepresented in the casualty lists.
Really?
And I'm like, I'm going to try for the Special Air Service. So that was what was in my head when I went down there. And I went to the recruiting office. I went to both recruiting depots, Morris Depot for the BSAP in Salisbury. It's now Harare. And then I went to the Army recruiting office, and they both took me. And they said, go back to your hotel room because it's the last weekend you're going to see. Enjoy your weekend.
Oh, wow.
And so while I was there, I'm like, I'm going to go with the Army. So I went to the Army recruiting office after the end of the weekend, presented myself, got on the local transport to the Special Air Service barracks, which was on the edge of Salisbury International Airport. They had a newly opened barracks that they took over. It was the old tobacco research station, but it was right beside the runway, so it was perfectly situated for their barracks and for their purposes.
Were you facing boot camp?
So,
did they have a boot camp?
Interestingly enough, if you look in the history of the SAS, whether it's British 22 SAS, Australian SAS, or New Zealand SAS, you'll see that recruitment into those units is done through already experienced soldiers. But the Rhodesians were having a manpower shortage. You have to remember, the European population in Rhodesia at the time was about 250,000 Europeans, and the African population was 9 million. So they were having acute manpower shortages everywhere.
Yeah.
So the Rhodesian SAS decided that it was better to take a raw recruit, put them through their training, then put them through selection, and then bring them into the regiment and train them. That way they didn't have to correct any bad habits that a experienced soldier might bring in from their parent regiment. So they started doing this process where they took raw recruits like me, put them through the basic training, and then sent them off in selection. And if you pass selection, then your real training begins.
Yeah.
Now, I did not make it to that stage, but that's the unit that I went into initially.
Tell me what happened.
Well, so at the time, when I got to the unit, intake 163 was already 6 to 8 weeks in their training program. And so there's no way that I could step into that program with 6 to 8 weeks already having occurred.
Yeah.
So basically what happened is after I drew all my equipment, and here's an interesting thing. When I went to draw my equipment, got all my clothes and my gear and kit, go to the armory, draw my FN rifle, and what do they give me? They give me 5 magazines and 120 rounds, and you load them, live rounds. They're giving a raw recruit 5 loaded magazines, and it had to be on your person with your rifle and webbing at all times, because even in their base, it was in the heart of the war.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in the first week that I was there, the airport was mortared by, I'm going to say, hard to say if it was either Zipra or Zanla guerrillas, but in the middle of the night, they mortared the air base, and so we got stood to, and a bunch of us got stuck out there on Land Rovers, mounted with what we call the MAG-58. Now, I think you'd call it the M240.
Okay.
To try and look for these guys. And
yeah.
It was an interesting first week exposure to the war. So what I'm doing in the time between intake 163 and intake 164 is I'm parading for duty every morning, and they're doing things like, okay,
So you're waiting for a class to pick up.
for a class to start.
Busy work.
Yeah, but what was really interesting was the details you'd get given. One morning, I recall, and this, I mentioned this one because even to this day, I'm still involved in this activity. I get ordered to go and report to boat troop. And I'm like, boat troop, where's the water? So I report to boat troop, which is this low covered brick building, and with sliding doors on the outside, wood sliding doors, and introduce myself to the sergeant who's running the show for the day. And he says, okay, he says, open up those doors. We got some boats to bring out. So I open up the doors, and there's all these big Zodiacs, and up in the rafters, on the rafters, are Klepper folding kayaks. I don't know if you've ever...
No idea what that is, no.
Well, the Rhodesian SAS and actually the Slough Scouts as well conducted some of the most audacious and effective raids on Zipra and Zanla using the Klepper folding kayak to get across Lake Kariba, which was at the time the largest man-made lake in the world, and also along the Zambezi and other rivers to infiltrate into the Zanla and Zipra terrorist bases and catch them with their pants down. I mean, unbelievable raids that they did using this really ancient technology. It's a wooden frame with a rubberized skin that you can take apart and put into a couple of backpacks, carry it wherever you need to go, set it up, and out you go. Carries 2 men and their gear. They did some incredible raids using these.
What kind of wildlife is in the water?
Crocodiles.
And hippos.
Hippos was the bad thing.
Hippos would be the big... I mean, I'd be scared of crocodiles too, I'll be honest.
But the hippos were actually more dangerous.
Super aggressive, yeah.
Yeah. And there were a couple of incidents I know on the SAS where operators had their kayaks crunched by hippos who just grabbed them and chopped them in half, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the operators weren't killed.
They're super territorial, I believe. I've had a little bit of experience and knowledge through the safari community from past work. And yeah, the hippos, Mozambique's a beautiful place. They've got, I know a concession manager. He doesn't own it. They don't let him own the concessions there, but it's like 500,000 acres that he's tried to rebuild since that war. He said after the war, the animals were completely decimated. Because I assumed that, I mean, you got to eat, right? They're eating anything they can shoot and get out.
Whatever's got meat on it, they'd have to forage for it and use it.
Right.
Yeah. So there I am at boat troop, hauling out these big old Zodiacs and outboard motors, and taking the Klepper folding kayaks apart, and learning all about what makes them tick, and I was like, wow. And of course, the Rhodesians were pretty tight-lipped about anything that was going on. So you didn't ask questions. You just, followed orders. And I didn't ask, what were they doing with these Kleppers? Or, I kept my eyes and ears open, but I wasn't going to go...
Loose lips sink Kleppers.
Yes, exactly. So that was the sort of thing that I was doing. I remember another time I got detailed to the armory, to work in the armory several times, actually. And oh my, the gear that was in there, they had things, silenced AK-47s with big cans on them, man, like huge cans, monstrous cans.
Wow.
And these were all basically homemade stuff. Suppressors. Now, they would work using subsonic ammunition, and you'd have to manually cycle the bolt, but quiet as quiet can be.
Oh, yeah.
They even had, I don't know if you remember the American 180, the 22 long rifle, drum-fed, had a pan magazine that goes on top, had a phenomenal rate of fire, something like 2,000 rounds per minute, 177 round drum magazine. They had several of those with suppressors as well.
Wow.
Yeah. Where they got them from, who knows? But,
sure.
They had all kinds of...
Armories are always cool.
and absolutely every comm block weapon you could ever imagine, because the Rhodesian SAS doing their cross-border raids would carry comm block equipment. Because that's what the opposition were using, and you could easily replenish supplies and whatnot, right. and it didn't stick out as well. Now, on some of the big raids they did, guys would go back and draw out their trusty FNs, because everybody knows how great a battle rifle the FN is. So, so I'd be doing things like that. And one occasion in particular that I remember, and this is where I hope we can kind of cross over into some of the amazing people that I met who were also serving in the Rhodesian Army from other countries other than Canada. I was detailed to help Bob Mackenzie's squadron put all their explosives and ammunition back into the magazine stores, which was a buried bunker surrounding the camp where we kept all that explosive stuff. And I got to meet Bob Mackenzie, Major Mackenzie of Rhodesian Special Air Service fame, in person, as he was directing us, getting all this gear safely stored away.
What is he known for?
Bob Mackenzie had been a soldier, I believe, in the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam. I believe that's what it's called.
Okay.
I may be mistaken on that, but he was I think it's part of the 101st, I think.
Okay.
And he had been grievously wounded in a battle called Mother's Day Hill. And he'd been invalided out of the U.S. Army with a 70% disability pension. And I think it was 1972, he pitched up in Rhodesia, joined the Rhodesian Army. I'm not sure if he went right into the Special Air Service as a trooper, or if he went through a unit like the Rhodesian Light Infantry first and then underwent SAS selection. But either way, he ended up as a trooper in the Rhodesian SAS regiment, and eventually became a major in the Rhodesian SAS regiment. And he was the most highly decorated American to have served in the Rhodesian Army. He won their second highest award for valor, which is the Silver Cross of Rhodesia. And one thing about Rhodesians is they didn't hand out medals easily. Silver Cross.
So you had to actually do something for that.
You had to really do, like, the second highest award for valor. There's probably about 20 individuals who were awarded that award in the entire war from 65 to 80. And Bob was one of them. He also got the Bronze Cross of Rhodesia, which is the third highest award for valor. And the Rhodesian SAS regiment had an inter-unit award called the Wings on Chest. And instead of wearing your pair of wings on your shoulder, you got to wear them over your chest, over your breast. So he had all three of those awards. And sadly, after the war was over, he became a correspondent for Bob Brown's Soldier Fortune magazine. And he was working for a company called Gurkha Security Guards on a contract in Sierra Leone. And he was ambushed, and he, along with his 2IC, who was, I believe, a British lieutenant, ex-British lieutenant, were both killed. And I want to touch on something about this story, because it has been widely reported in the media that Bob was eaten alive by the RUF rebels. And that story is...
You mean literally?
Literally chopped up, wounded, chopped up and eaten alive by them. That story is absolutely, categorically not true.
Okay. How do you know that?
A fellow colleague from the Rhodesian Army at the time had been in charge of security at a mining outfit in Sierra Leone, and the RUF had taken him prisoner. And they had put him in a cell that was right beside their radio room and their headquarters. And while the battle was going on, and afterwards, he was able to overhear the conversations between the RUF units that had carried out the ambush and their headquarters, which were in clear, unbroken English. There was no coded transmission or anything like that.
Yeah.
And he overheard them describing the two individuals that they had killed. And the RUF commanders were asking their headquarters, what do you want us to do with them? And they just said, leave them where they lie and take their equipment. So basically, they stripped them of their equipment, left the bodies where they lay. What happened to the bodies afterwards? Hard to say. They could have been dismembered by wildlife or,
Sure.
That kind of thing. But there's absolutely no truth to the rumor, which put Bob's extended family through a lot of suffering because they heard these crazy rumors.
Yeah, that'd be hard to hear your family had died that way.
So I want to make that clear, and I'm sure that Al Venter, who was mostly responsible for publishing this story, will probably hate me forever, but hey.
Well, get your shit right, Al.
Anyhow. I got to meet Bob McKenzie and met him several times during my time in that regiment, waiting for my recruit class to begin. Hell of a nice guy. Didn't raise his voice a lot. Reminded me more of a coach than a bellowing officer, screaming and shouting and carrying on like a command sergeant major or whatever you would call it
What kind of leadership style did you respond to the best when you were over there?
You start screaming and yelling at me, my back gets up. And that's everything I can do if I deserve it, I deserve it.
Sure.
I have no problem with that. But when it's just like
the dog that's always barking gets ignored.
Oh man.
The best first sergeant I remember having, First Sergeant Flegel, was the most decorated Marine in the Marine Corps in 2004 when he was our company first sergeant. And I don't think I've ever heard that man say more than a simple word. And until there was one day on our deployment that he kicked his door open and he yelled, and the whole company was scampering to do whatever the hell it was that he said. And it was because he was always very cool, calm, and collected. If you fucked up, and we'll deal with it. But he wasn't going to scream at you, and he wasn't going to belittle you. You were going to deal with the situation and move on. And it made him stand out even more because he didn't, as so many others did, And so there was a tangible level of respect that was reserved for him because of that.
Yep.
And I agree with you 100%.
Now, in recruit training, of course, it's a different story.
Yeah,
different
you got to stress them out a little bit.
You're going to be getting yelled at from morning.
They got to know you don't like them.
So finally, about I guess I did about a month of that kind of marking time going, another interesting one that still sticks out in my mind. I get this morning parade. All right, go see Captain, I think it was Curtin, who's passed away now. I'm pretty sure it was Captain Curtin. He's got something for you to do in the headquarters building. So this tobacco research building was a grand old beautiful series of colonial style, big heavy duty block buildings, beautifully ornate. Just it was an amazing place. Anyhow, I go in there, come to attention. I'd learned to salute by this time because I didn't know any of the proper military protocol about standing to attention, saluting, and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, so I'd learned that part. I go in, he says, sit down, son. Sit down in front of his desk. And he brings out one of those comm block zip tin boxes of ammunition. I think they hold about 700 rounds. And he says, you're going to put, it was nail polish that he had on the primer and around the junction, the cannular of the case, and then put them in this box
of every bullet.
Wow. So I'm like,
that sucks.
Okay. So I was trying to figure out what exactly it was. But again, don't ask questions.
Yep.
Get the nail polish and start painting bullets. And
yep.
So I'm doing that. And then he had another bunch, and he says, I can't remember how he had me mark them. But in hindsight, I think they were subsonic 7.62x39.
Okay.
So I was marking them with a different mark so they would know that that's for the silenced AK-47s that I had seen. So there I am.
So it was to mark the bullets. It wasn't because you were going to do something in the water.
Well, the ones with the nail polish was to stop water from.
Okay, that's what I assumed when you said it was okay. You're going to get in the water.
The other ones was to mark them that they were subsonic ammo. That's what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Again, I didn't ask questions. I just,
Yeah, it's best not to.
I'm a recruit, got no standing whatsoever. So, yeah, okay. Anyhow, about a month of that goes on. And I have to admit that all the time, I was, as a young policeman, I remember when I got my uniform, and I think I told you about this earlier, that the uniform literally was falling off my shoulders and, I could barely keep my pants up. And I'm told to go up and see the deputy chief in charge of York Regional Police, Deputy Chief, oh my gosh. No. He was an ex-Metropolitan Toronto police officer, had been on the homicide squad in Metro Toronto Police back in the days where you had to be something really special to get on the homicide squad. Wally Harkness was his name. Anyhow, Wally Harkness was now the deputy chief. I go in, I'm standing, I actually knew how to stand to attention for him. Don't know why, but anyhow, he says, he looks at me, he's got a cigarette, looks me up and down, he goes, "Son, I'm going to give you one piece of information." He said, "In this line of work, keep your eyes and ears open and your mouth shut." Best piece of advice I think I was ever given. So all this time while I'm doing these marking time duties, waiting for my course to start, I'm keeping my eyes and ears open, watching what's going on around me. And I'm in the heart of this regiment, which is literally doing
active combat missions, right?
On a scale that people would find hard to believe. Like, we could probably get into some of the details later, but I mean, guys in the Rhodesian Light Infantry, when that unit became parachute trained in 1976 so that the Rhodesian SAS wouldn't have to do fire force duties and could concentrate on our outside the border activities, guys in the Rhodesian Light Infantry, once they'd become paratrained and they were manning the fire force deployments within the country, were sometimes parachuting into combat 3 times a day. 3 times a day.
Damn.
Des Archer has the record for Rhodesian servicemen for operational jumps, 73 operational parachute jumps. And you remember, the Brits are very, they keep records of all the jumps. So everybody's got their parachute logbook. It's got every jump, date, time, the weather, whether it was a good jump, bad jump, or what have you. 73 operational combat jumps.
Wow.
3 times in a day. Can you imagine?
I can't imagine pulling off 3 missions in a day. Like, most of the time a mission takes, at least for me, it was days, sometimes longer. What kind of missions were they doing? Were they able to get in, get out? Were they snatching people? Were they?
So Fire Force was a system that was set up using, the country was divided into operational areas, 5 or 6 operational areas. Each operational area had a joint operations command, and they had a fire force located through that operational area. Now, usually it was only one. Sometimes there might be 2 fire force units available. And the fire force consisted basically of 4 Alouette 3 helicopters and one or two DC-3 Dakota aircraft equipped to handle paratroopers. I think they could hold 20 paratroopers in a DC-3. So a fire force was activated usually when a Selous Scouts covert team sighted a group of terrorists and marked their location and then called the information back to the Joint Operations Command Center. And then the fire force would be dispatched to that location. So you've got these 4 Alouette 3 helicopters, 3 of which were equipped with twin 303 Browning machine guns on the side. And one of them was equipped with a 20 mil cannon, the French Matra 131 cannon, which was developed out of the ME-109 cannon from World War II. It was a short cannon with a reduced power round, but it's a 20 mil projectile, basically a small hand grenade that's coming at you about 700 feet per second or meters per second, and very accurate. And what would happen is each Alouette would have a stick of 4 RLI soldiers in it. They would envelop the terrorist sighting location on the ground, sweep towards that location, and the DC-3 would be orbiting overhead, and if needed, they'd drop those pairs out of the DC-3. And so then they would literally close with the insurgents and get to grips with them, and the idea was to kill them, and kill them was the aim of the day, although I do recall that Ron Reed Daly, who was in charge of the Selous Scouts and who had actually been the regimental sergeant major of the RLI at one point in his career, lamented the fact that they couldn't get enough captures because the RLI was killing them all, and they needed fresh captures to turn to get vital intelligence information, which would help the Selous Scouts operators in the field be up to date with all the security procedures the Zandler Zipper guerrillas were using. And oftentimes those captures, they were given a choice. They were taken to Selous Scouts headquarters, and basically you can face the hangman, or we'll look after you. We'll train you. We'll get your family from the tribal trust land, because remember, a lot of these people were from Rhodesia. They had been taken out of the country to become terrorists or guerrillas, whatever you want to call them, and then infiltrated back in. So many of them, when faced with that option, chose to become Selous Scouts.
Sure.
And that worked out actually very, very well for the Selous Scouts, who were 95% African and only about 5% European operators in the Selous Scouts. So Reed Daly was always like, they're too efficient, they're too good at killing, and lamented the fact that he couldn't get enough new
Well, it's more fun and a little easier to do. Keeping them alive and then dealing with, did y'all have any that didn't fully turn, that maybe killed your guys?
I'm quite certain.
We dealt with a lot of that with the Afghans.
I'm quite certain that in today's litigious climate, that a lot of the killings that were done would not be regarded as legitimate.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you shoot till they can't shoot back anymore.
Right.
And if they're facing you or running away or whatever, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're there to do one thing: close with the enemy and kill them.
That's one thing about this Ukraine and even what's going on in Israel is with everybody has a camera now.
Oh yes.
From the drones to the individual, and like you can get on Instagram and watch people kill each other on the war front.
Yep. I
don't know.
No, it's not really.
You think the public is prepared for that? I don't.
It's not something I like to spend any time doing. On occasion, if it's something that's worth watching, I might watch it if I think it has some newsworthy value. But I don't want to watch people getting killed.
Yeah.
You see enough of that, and it's like, don't need to see any more. Yeah.
Yeah, it just pops up in your feed now.
Oh,
you can watch.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy.
Watch it all day long.
Crazy. I don't know how to. I don't understand.
It's an interesting thing that I don't know how to feel about, because when there are no cameras, as you said, like there's shit that happens,
mm-hmm.
and when there's obviously still shit that happens because we're watching it. But is it possible that there's less? Is it possible with cameras around that people that would be murdered and massacred maybe won't because of the PR pushback? Maybe Russia doesn't give a shit, but I can't imagine. It was like, this will be really bad for us.
No, that's not good. I don't see that happening in the Russian.
I don't either. But do you know what I mean though? Like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because I don't feel like it's a good thing.
We were under strict orders not to have any cameras with us anywhere.
Right.
Which of course was widely broken. That rule was widely broken. I took a camera. My father gave me a camera, which interestingly enough was a Russian-made 35 millimeter camera. Mm. And in the very beginning, I had one roll of film because Rhodesia was under sanctions. You couldn't get film. That was one of the things you couldn't get. Mm. Forget about trying to, especially 35 millimeter roll of film. Not a chance. So I used that camera for about the first half of the year till I used up the 25 or 35 pictures in it. And then I had to resort to these brownie box type cameras. I can't remember.
Wind up?
Well, yeah, basically, yeah.
That's what we had in 2003. Our parents would mail us wind-up cameras, and we'd mail them back.
Exactly. You mail the whole camera
Yep.
back, and it gets, yeah. So I managed to secure one of those, which I then used for about the next to about 2/3 of my time there, and then I got one more even smaller type as well to get my last bunch of photos that I took. But no, if you were caught, you'd be charged, and you'd probably go to detention barracks which was not a good place to be in the Rhodesian military.
What were the punishments like? What did they do?
Well, everything was an extra.
What do you mean?
Didn't matter. Didn't matter what you did. It would be an offense, on parade in the morning. His hair's out of place. Extras. Extras would mean after the day was over, you would report to the regimental sergeant major's office for extra duties, which was usually, cleaning toilets, sweeping floors, something really shitty that no one else wanted to do.
Yeah.
So everything was an extra.
So they had to come up with some standards for y'all to break, so they could assign you with some shit to do that nobody wanted to do.
And no rifle was ever clean enough.
Oh yeah.
No, never, ever, ever, ever. So getting back to the Rhodesian SAS recruit course. Finally, my course. So it's January, February, about mid-February. My course, intake 164, set to go. And I start off as a recruit in Rhodesian SAS, intake 164. And everything they did in recruit training was done like it was selection. You didn't come last for anything, because if you did, you got punished badly for it.
Sure.
Usually with extras, which were extras in the recruit training depot, not the regimental sergeant major's orbit. So a very good example of an extra that sticks out in my mind today is range day was Thursday, and we had to run to the range with all of our combat equipment. Again, we've all got live rounds in our rifles. There's no blank. I didn't see a blank cartridge ever in the Rhodesian Army except to fire a rifle grenade, the ballistite cartridge. And so we had to run to the range with all our gear, and then you did your range training at the range. One of the lads had an accidental discharge, or there were two types: accidental discharge or negligent discharge, whatever you want to call it.
We argue that there's only one type. It's negligent. But yeah.
So there were always two. Well, there was always one punishment given out at range day in the Rhodesian Special Air Service Regiment. One of them was the shit shot cowbell for the worst shottist of the day, and he had to wear a big old cowbell around his neck for the whole week at all times.
The whole week?
The whole week. Couldn't take it off. Couldn't. You would hear that guy coming from miles away.
Dun, dun.
Got that cowbell clip. And he would wear it until the next range day, where he had
Pray to God he outshot somebody else.
Exactly, and that person would get to wear it.
That's hilarious.
The negligent,
I like that.
The negligent discharge award, we'll call it, was the offender was given a choice: detention barracks for 30 days. You didn't want that.
30 days is a long time.
Yes. Or a 1,000-round crate of 7.62 NATO, which weighs 66 pounds, that you must carry with you at all times until the next range day, in addition to all of your equipment.
Damn.
So late at night, we're all gathered back at the regiment, at the recruit training depot part of the regiment. And we're waiting for the guy who got the 66-pound box of ammo to come in, and it's dark, and you can't help him. You're forbidden to help him. So we're waiting at the gate where he's supposed to come in, because he's trying to run back with 66 additional pounds to carry, plus his rifle and all of his gear. And he comes in about 10 o'clock at night, and trying to remember his name. I've got the list of all my classmates actually, and a photo of our class, which I need to show you at some point.
Yeah, I definitely want to do the show and tell, and we'll get away.
Anyhow, he makes it in, and he made it through the rest of the week until the next time, and I don't believe he had either an AD or an ND ever again.
I bet.
But
it's fun. The cowbell thing cracks me up. That reminds me of the final stalk in sniper school. I painted my face like a clown. And I got busted. And they were not impressed with it.
Was it in clown colors, or was it?
No, I only had cami paint, right? So I did like bright green and did big smiley face and the whole thing. And I had already scored high enough to pass. And so I could essentially fall off the truck. And so they're like, "Get up, pig." And I get up and I take my veil off. And they're like, "What the fuck?" And like, "Oh, you think you're a clown, huh?" And so I got to like, I had to juggle for them and tell jokes, and then they gave me a big metal bucket and a stick, and I had to run circles around the stalk lane until everybody was done banging on my bucket and screaming, "I'm an ass clown."
You got to hand it to those instructors, right? I mean,
the creativity was there.
Oh man,
I appreciated them, and I learned to juggle because of that. They gave me a roll of duct tape, an empty canteen, and a pill bottle, which are all 3 different sizes and 3 different weights. And I didn't know how to juggle. And so it's such a fucking mess. Geez. But I specifically made an attempt and learned to juggle. And I can still juggle today because of that.
That's hilarious. Oh my God. Yeah, I got to hand it to those instructors. They had incredible.
The shenanigans are pretty fun. And they get real creative about how to make life suck.
So a couple of takeaways from the recruit training and the Rhodesian SAS. Oh, explosives. So in the Rhodesian military, there were basically 2 types of explosive devices: M962 hand grenade, pineapple type hand grenade. Mm-hmm. The M970 white phosphorus grenade, which was used mostly for marking positions, but also was pretty good in trenches and bunkers and that sort of thing too. And then your regular type of smoke grenade, whether red or whatever color. So
an HE, a white phosphorus, and smoke.
Yeah.
Okay.
So our instructor, Sergeant Haynes, who was the explosives instructor, and was missing a finger from a det that went off in his hand. So he had some experience. Yeah. When we went out to do grenade and explosives training. Oh, and the other thing too was the Rhodesian SAS had this beautiful thing called the bunker bomb. It was a 1 kilogram or 5 kilogram cylinder of HE with no metal or nothing that could produce fragmentation, and it was simply a concussive type device. So imagine a kilogram of HE going off in an enclosed area. That's going to ring your eardrums.
Like flashbang.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And 5 kilograms is going to bring a building down.
Yeah.
So we go out to do explosives training with Sergeant Haynes, and we're on this hard standing right next to the airport runway where aircraft are coming in and going out. And Haynes says, he gives us the rundown on the bunker bomb. And he goes, "Okay, Hughes, throw it over there." And we're like, he says, "Pull the pin on it, throw it over there." And we're like, "Over there." He's like, "Yeah, throw it over there." So we're like,
"How far over there?"
"Well, as far as you could throw," which is not that far.
Yeah, no, it doesn't sound very far.
A kilogram of material, I mean, you're not going to toss it too far.
Yeah.
And so we're like, "Okay." And wham, the thing is like, you're right beside the runway. Now, they had phoned the airfield tower, control tower before, saying that,
"Sure, we're going to
training is going to be going on. Don't be worried if you see or hear explosions." And then he set one of the 5 kilogram ones up, and we got back a little further this time, but holy crap, what a thunderclap.
Yeah, that concussion's impressive.
Yeah. And then you'd be doing things like setting claymores up and, mowing the tops down of mapani trees with the claymores, like literally shredding the treetops clean of leaves and branches. So very hands-on kind of stuff. You know? And no little bunker to get down in if somebody screws up throwing grenades or what have you. Now, we didn't throw a fragmentation grade, obviously, in that case, but that's the kind of hands-on training that they did, and everything, as I say, was done like it was selection. So I go through about, I'm doing a fourth or fifth week of this.
Did you get to pick up with a class, or are you still between classes?
No. Now I've started with intake 164, brand new class, right from scratch, right from start.
Okay.
So I'm about 4 weeks into the class, and afternoon PT consists. There was a gum tree plantation at one end of the barracks. A pretty big plantation, a couple acres worth of gum trees, big round trees, all planted neatly in rows. And you would run through the rows of trees and back again. That was one of your afternoon PTs. And I noticed one day that we got started on afternoon PT, and I started feeling nauseous. Now, one of the things about Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, is that the entire country is almost 1 mile high. So you are in thinner air than if you're used to sea level conditions.
Yeah, about 5,000 feet.
Yeah, I noticed this right away. Like I was involved in sports heavily as a youngster. Played basketball in high school. Always sports minded, doing stuff, and I thought I was pretty fit. But when you go from sea level to 5,000 feet, then you start to learn about fitness. And I can only imagine
about altitude
and altitude. Yeah. And the other thing is the intensity of the sun. So I'm this white bread kid from Canada, never been near a tropical or equatorial sun, and I'm 5,000 feet higher than I normally was. And that sun just played havoc on my skin, raised these incredible blisters and bubbles. They would rise up as soon as I got in the sun, they'd burst, and I would be like, my uniform looked like I'd jumped in a pool. And
from busted blisters.
From these busted blisters. And the only thing you could do is put calamine lotion on them, which helped. But it took several months before.
Did they have long sleeve blouses for you guys? Or
yes. This shirt originally came as a long sleeve, and then the tailor cut them back for you.
Okay.
But in the bush, you were supposed to be fully cammed.
You want to be.
Although there was a time, and I do have some pictures of this, where the Rhodesians fought their bush war in short shorts and literally tank tops, including jumping out of the DC-3s and stuff like that.
Well, it's kind of a very African thing. At least the PHs that I know, they don't even own pants. All they wear are shorts.
Yeah.
And they're kind of shorts too.
They're like nutcracker shorts. Yeah.
And they're in the bush. And it's crazy.
So, these two things were climatically battling against me while I was there, and I found that it was like, what I could do 100% before, I could only do at like 60 or 70% now. So I always felt like physically I was behind everybody else. But these kids were born in this; they grew up like this. They're acclimated to it. Anyhow, I started feeling nauseous during this run through the gum trees. And what I remember is I blacked out. I came to, and I'm lying in what they term the regimental hospital bed. It's not a hospital, but just a place where sick people go, whatever. I can't remember the exact name of it, but I come to, and I've got a fever so bad. I am like I'm delirious. I don't really know where I am. The regimental medic came over. I know he put a thermometer under my tongue and he pulled it out. And I remember this much. He read the reading and he said, "Get this man to the hospital right away." So I go to the hospital suffering from heat stroke.
Probably about 104, maybe. Hopefully not 105.
It was way up there. Like
you would die higher than that.
Yeah. So high enough that an experienced combat medic said, "Get him to the hospital right away."
Yeah. Because
they didn't know what to do with me. They just brought me back to the bed and tried to cool me down. And so then I'm in hospital, and I'm recovering from heat stroke, and while I'm in it was Andrew Fleming Hospital, and while I'm there, I'm not sure it was Andrew Fleming because I then got moved to the KG6 medical facility, which is the barracks in Salisbury at the time, the main headquarters. I got sent to KG6 Hospital, but somewhere along the way, I got a form of African dysentery. And as I think I mentioned to you before, if I put a glass of water in my mouth, it came explosively out my rear seconds later.
Really?
Seconds later, explosively, like, look out.
Wow.
So I'm in hospital recovering from this.
Bunker bomb.
Yeah. Yeah. Shitty bunker bomb. Yeah. For a couple of weeks, get to so the training troop would send me my course materials to try and help me keep up with what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I well enough to be discharged, and back to training troop I go, and they kind of put me on light duties, which was pretty good for them to do that. They said, you carry along with the course. In a few weeks' time, we'll be going to advanced battle camp. He said, it'll be much different than what we're doing now. You'll be, keep up with what we're doing. So I worked my way back into the program, the recruit training program. But I knew that whatever I had taken a huge toll on me physically. And I knew that there was no way I was going to be able to keep up. So I went to the training troop instructor, Sergeant Major Masson, great guy, super guy. Still have been in touch with him thanks to the miracle of Facebook. Screw you, Zuckerberg. But anyhow, and he said, well, we can put you on the next intake, but he said we're not sure when it's going to be. And I'm looking at the clock. So now we're into January. We're into March of 1980 now. And already the writing was sort of on the wall that the war was likely going to be coming to an end within the next year. And I'm like, man, I could just be marking time here for the rest of the war. I will never get to see what it's really like go out there. I can hear all the stories and whatnot as a rear echelon, mofo, but I want to get out there and take part in it. I didn't come halfway around the world just to sit in the rear base doing nothing.
I don't keep coming to practice to not play a game, coach.
Exactly. So the selection process had been going on so my intake was 164. Intake 163 selection process had been underway. And it starts with what they call a 24-hour pre-rev. So the guys who drop off in the first 24 hours, they get sent back to the Rhodesian SAS barracks. And they got to turn in their equipment. And
they start with some type of extreme selection in doc to get people to quit in the first day?
Yes, basically. So now what they've got now remember at this time, they've got intake 163's recruits, right, that are undergoing selection. These are recruits that have started off as untrained soldiers, now are trained soldiers by the Rhodesian SAS. Mm-hmm. Into that mix, they bring in already trained soldiers to take part in selection, including some people like me who had come from other countries, but were experienced soldiers in those other countries. And so they would get thrown into that selection process. And they'd start them off with, like I say, the 24-hour pre-rev where you are nonstop 24-hour physical.
Can we make him quit?
Can we make him quit? Exactly. Ring the bell,
I'm
whatever.
Familiar.
Yeah. So while I am in the recruit program, trying to figure out what I'm going to do now, back squad to the next course, or do I look somewhere else? These guys came in that had fallen off the selection that was already going on. And one of them was this British guy, Paul Richardson, about which we may be able, hopefully if we have time to get into. Not a happy story, not a pleasant story, but Paul Richardson comes in claiming to have been in the British 22 SAS, falling off the selection process in less than 24 hours. He's got,
It doesn't look good.
he's a kind of a big kind of a guy, pudgy guy. You look at him, you go, you're SAS in Britain? I'm like,
Bullshit.
sketchy. Yeah. So he's like, he goes, I was in 22 SAS. These Rhodesians don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to run selection. And already I'm thinking, oh yeah. And he says, I'm going to go to the Armored Car Regiment. I'm going to ride into battle. Well, I thought, okay, I'll ask the Sergeant Major Masson if I can go to Armored Cars and get an interview with the CO and see if I can get transferred to there. So when I told Masson, he was furious. And he's like, don't go to that wanked out unit. They got this yank commanding officer. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's got no idea. You don't want to go there. And he even said that Richardson was never in 22 SAS. And they knew
He was full of shit.
because the Rhodesian SAS was originally part of 22 SAS.
Well, it's a small community. Like everybody can,
Very
you're not going to get away with that shit. And it blows my mind people still do that stuff.
Yeah, he actually went on after the war to create a career for himself based on this lie.
Yeah.
And it was unbelievable. But that's another
Stolen
story.
valor is a real thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. So anyhow, I said, no, sir. I said, I want to get into the war, man. And Masson said, all right, I'll get your orders sorted out. So I decided all my kit back into the quartermaster stores at the Rhodesian SAS. I get transport down to the Armored Car Regiment. And I get an interview with Major Darrell, or he was then Captain Darrell Winkler, another American Vietnam veteran who's serving in the Rhodesian Army. Now, my understanding was Winkler had been a sergeant in the U.S. Army in Vietnam and had got a battlefield commission. I don't know how that works in your military. No idea. But
I don't think that's happened since any part of GWAT. No one, not that I know of, did battlefield commissions. But Vietnam, I mean,
they had whole
the casualties where I could see where that was necessary.
Yeah. So I remember to this day going into Darrell Winkler's office, and he's sitting behind his desk, and unassuming looking guy, and the regimental sergeant major, Stan Van Breda, who was an outstanding regimental sergeant major. Oh my gosh, I have nothing but the utmost respect for that man. He helped me out in a couple of occasions where, as tough as he was fair as you could ever find a man being fair. He saw the right side and the wrong side of everything, and that's how you got treated. You're on the right side, he'd back you all the way. Wrong side, look out.
Yeah.
So I told Winkler what had gone on at the SS recruit training. I said, I think I've got enough under my belt that I could be an asset to the regiment. And Winkler looks at me and looks at Van Breda, and he's like, all right, he said, I'll put you in support troop infantry. He said, you'll be riding around in what the Rhodesians had for an armored personnel carrier, and you'll be responding to call-outs in the operational area where we are, which was in the northeast part of Rhodesia, in a small place called Mudzi. So it was near Matoko, where there was a big Fire Force base kept. And I'm like, okay. And he said, but he said to me, he says, I'm warning you. He said, you're going to be marching around that bush 25 miles every day. He said, so you better be fit. And I was still feeling the effects of the heat stroke and all. And I'm like, yeah,
25
yes, sir.
miles a day.
Yeah. And he wasn't lying. We were out there a long time doing the standard counterinsurgency thing, laying ambushes, following up on tracks, doing patrols, responding to call-outs of sightings, that sort of thing. And it was on so I go back, get my gear, get into the Armored Car Regiment, draw my gear from the Armored Car Regiment, get sorted out with a room at the Corporals and Privates Mess in KG6 Barracks, which was where the armored cars was. And then I'm on transport up to the northeast border area to this little place called Mudzi, Mudzi, I believe it's spelled. And there I spend
Got your wish.
April, May, during the internal election period that was ongoing within the country at the time, which resulted in the creation of the first multiracial parliament in Rhodesian history, with Bishop Abel Muzorewa as the very first African prime minister of Rhodesia. Now, that internal settlement was not recognized by the rest of the world, so instead of the war ending, the war carried on. But yes, got my wish for April and May to be out in the bush doing, what they had been trying to teach us at the Rhodesian SAS recruit course about. And
how did you feel about it?
I'm still suffering from the hangover from the heat stroke. I'm still not acclimated.
You're still sensitive to heat.
Oh yeah.
Once you have a heat stroke, I mean, you're at risk for the rest of your life. It does something. It changes something in your body's ability to manage its own thermodynamics.
I'm pretty good now, but I haven't really been back into that kind of.
Haven't tested it.
Yeah, not to that level. Don't want no. Yeah. So here we are. We're basically living under our ground sheets, which we've tied together, put up over a framework, and we're living under this for 2 months. Now, we did have the place we were staying at was an old hotel that had been abandoned and taken over by the Army, and it was actually quite nice. It was a beautiful building, beautiful thatched roof, African-style main hall, up on a kind of a high hill overlooking this incredible northeastern border landscape of rocky, mountainous outcrops, and blue sky and sunshine all the time. And when the breeze blew, it was a cooling breeze. But man, in the heat of the day, that sunlight was intense.
I bet.
Man. So got into my first contact. I will call it a real contact there. And I was actually asleep when it happened. Riding in the back of these 7.5 ton mine and ambush protected vehicles, which are the forerunner of all the MRAPs and stuff that you're using today.
Nice.
These were evolved from the Rhodesian South African experience in the bush wars of the 70s.
Were they using a lot of mines and like IED style?
Oh yeah. Not only just regular old mines, but boosted mines and mines that couldn't be detected by.
How did they boost them?
They'd just lay another mine on top of them.
So double stacked.
Stacking them up, yeah.
We had a stint in Fallujah area, particularly along Route Lincoln, where they started putting acetylene tanks with them. Ooh. And that'd flip a track. It broke every dude's legs that were inside the track because it didn't breach it, but it made a huge wave in the steel when it went off. It flipped the track and it broke all the guys' legs.
And
it started burning guys alive, and it was not good.
There's some interesting the Rhodesian vehicles, which if you look at them, you can see the design and the V-shaped bottom, deflecting the blast, that sort of thing. But the Rhodesians had some interesting ideas. They designed the bodies so that at a certain overpressure, they'd pop off the chassis and go tumbling, so that you're not subjected to the complete pressures and forces of the blast. You get propelled away from it.
Just the somersault gymnastics.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow. But did that save people?
Yes, because they had these huge heavy-duty roll bars over the open compartment part of the vehicle, and it was a roll bar, and the thing would just blow off and roll. Now, you had to be wearing your harness. You had a harness that went over your shoulders, and if you weren't wearing that, well, you're going to come out and you might get crushed by the vehicle or what have you. So yes, they did work very well, extremely well, and there were numerous examples of how well they worked. Now, sure, guys would have injuries, eardrums busted, broken arms or legs or what have you.
You're just
But
grateful to be alive.
grateful to be alive. And one of the interesting things, so I don't know who did the development in the United States, for example, of the MRAPs, but in the Rhodesian vehicles, you had a central bench seat that ran down the middle of the vehicle, and you sat back to back on it.
Mhm.
And your gun port is in front of you, and you've got your rifle barrel sticking out the gun port. And that was pretty good if you were ambushed without the mines for delivering effective return fire from either side of the vehicle.
Mhm.
Now, my understanding is with the American and other designs is they put the guys on either side of the vehicle so that they're not sitting back to back in the center. And I could never quite understand that because it really doesn't put you in a position to fire out of the vehicle effectively.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's gun ports in with the MRAPs.
Well, we ended up getting essentially a joystick to automatically control the gun from outside, so no one had to breach the vehicle.
Oh, okay.
And so, I mean, unless they disabled the gun or damaged it somehow, we weren't cracking unless the vehicle was damaged or couldn't move. And so we had I forget, it was like a Crow system, and we could control a minigun on the vehicle.
Wow.
Just watch a screen and it was cool.
Damn, the ultimate video game.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, and you could open and go up and shoot if you wanted to, but yeah, they tried to. As it progressed, it was just more and more armor, more and more, bulletproofing and. But when we rolled into Fallujah, we were in 7 tons, sitting on our packs back to back, just like that, with our rifles over the wall, and we didn't have armored anything. Yeah. We just had wooden slats, and we rested our rifles on there, and we drove from Kuwait all the way to the Jordan border.
Wow. The Rhodesians did other things. They filled their tires with water on their vehicles. Yeah, partly filled with water. The idea that the water would absorb and dissipate some of the blast. They
get thirsty. You got some water.
Well, there were water tanks built into those vehicles, though. So they would put conveyor belting on the floor, like thick conveyor belts to stop shrapnel or the bottom of the floor bursting and causing fragmentation, injuries, and that kind of thing. Remarkably successful. I mean, yes, there were fatalities, there were injuries, but far fewer than what there could have been because the mine war was a huge part of that war.
Where were they getting them?
Russia or China, and all of their suppliers. Mm-hmm. Now, the Rhodesians did have another interesting vehicle, which I have seen as well has been developed by the U.S. and other countries, and it was called the Pookie mine detecting vehicle. It was basically, think of a dune buggy with a Volkswagen engine, lengthened out, and they put big fat F1 racing tires on it, and you have a small armored cocoon for the operator who drops 2 booms, radar detecting booms out the side for the Pookie to pick up where a mine may be buried. And it was a fairly sensitive radar. Now, once they got smart and started putting the non-metallic ones in, it got more difficult for them to find them, but they came up with good ways to even detect those. And using the Pookie, they just changed some of the output of the radar, I believe, emissions.
Some of the sensitivities or something, yeah.
And the ground contact of those wide F1 tires was such they could roll over most mines and not set them off.
Wow.
And even if they were command controlled, the operator's got the same design compartment that he's sitting in, with all bulletproof windows and bulletproof for 7.62 comm block and NATO stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's in there doing his thing. And again, that thing discovered and rendered inoperable so many mines. It's unbelievable. That was one of the true unsung heroes of that war. And another reason why there were so few casualties for how many mines were actually laid in that war. Most of the casualties were to civilians detonating the mines.
Really?
Civilian transport.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyhow, such we pass. I'm asleep in the back of my 7.5. I've got my gun, my FN out the gun port, and I'm like this. And I'm not kidding you, Zach. I thought I heard a symphony, like a musical symphony, an orchestra. And I could hear this. And it's going the up and down.
Just the percussion, right?
Yeah. And what it was the guys with the twin Brownings on some of the vehicles responding. And the twin Brownings, because of the nature of the 30 cal Browning, which we had converted to 7.62 NATO Brownings, their cyclic rate tended to rise and fall as they heated up, cooled down, heated up, cooled down.
Interesting.
And in tandem, you'd hear this odd cacophony of sound. So I wake up and I'm like, and then I hear somebody yelling, contact, we're in contact. And we drive through what was the killing zone. We debus. And I remember that I jumped off the back of the 7.5, which is fairly high step out the rear. And I'm wearing this Faraday jacket webbing, which has all of your magazines and grenades and everything in this kind of jacket that you wear, as opposed to webbing on a harness.
Okay.
And a lot of the guys wore them. But after this particular incident, I went back to webbing, because when I jumped down on the ground, it was like a ton of bricks I'm carrying on my shoulders, and I thought I'd bust my shoulders, and I literally went down like chin into my knee on the ground position, and I stagger up, and anyhow we debus on the opposite side of the vehicle from the gunfire. Then we go back along the roadway till we get into the kill zone area, and then we start up this literally near vertical type ascent to where they believed the position was, the ambush position was. And by this time, the Elan armored cars had come back along the roadway, and they've got their 90 mil cannons trained on the area. And so I remember that, before we debust, I had a rifle grenade in my rifle. And so whoever was in charge of the vehicle said, fire off that grenade. So I pulled the pin out of it, and poof, I don't have a target. I'm just firing in the general direction.
That direction, yeah.
Yeah, somewhere out there. I hear it go off. Anyhow, so now we're out of the vehicle. We're lined up we're prone, facing this, where we think the ambush position is. The armored cars have come up behind us, and they start firing on the position with their 90 mil cannons. And like, we're right out in front of the 90 mil cannon. It's a pretty big cannon. It's got a good muzzle blast. So they're laying fire up in there. Now, it wasn't Daryl Winkler's 2.5, but it was a 2.5 Unimog, just like Daryl's, that had a Browning 50 cal M2 mounted in the back. And the gunner is firing up into this rock cliff, and it's amazing some of the sounds and things you hear when you're in battle that you don't. And so he's banging away with the 50. So you're hearing the muzzle blast from the 50, and then you're hearing the sound of the 50 bullets impacting into the rock, which are echoing back, because it was like a kind of an echo chamber up there, the way the rock could, like an amphitheater. And so it's echoing back the sounds of the 50 bullets as they're hitting the rock. So you're hearing this, from the gunner, and then you hear this bang, 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 bang from up top, and then he starts firing. All these sounds are going off. Anyhow, the guy beside me's got his FN rifle right next to my ear, and he fires off a round like this far from my ear, and I swear it was like somebody popped me right in the side of the head, and I was literally, I thought I was almost knocked out, man, and intense pain in my ear now.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Thanks a lot, asshole.
Yeah. So we scale this vertical rock cliff. We get up to where we can see where there was the location of the ambush the machine gun, whatever they're using. There's some empty rounds and cases, but they had fired off, I don't know, a couple magazines of AK, and in turn, we had responded with hundreds of small arms, 50 cal ammunition, precious 90 mil ammunition for the Elands, because Rhodesians were under sanctions, so they couldn't easily replace that kind of material.
Yeah.
So for the price of a few hundred AK rounds, they had us firing off thousands and thousands of dollars of very hard to get arms and or ammunition in response. So it kind of made me start to realize that from an economic standpoint, these guys are killing the Rhodesians. Because the Rhodesians can't replace this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, first contact there, and then there were some other ones. We did some OPs where we're supposed to be clandestine, and another group of our support troop infantry bounced a group of terrorists up, and saw a nice little battle unfolding before us down in the valley that we were looking over, stuff like that. And then the election period is over, the new parliament's installed, and I'm back at the Armored Car Regiment, and I'm on the Elan 90 Armored Car course. So for June and July, I become a driver, gunner, and commander on a Elan 90 Armored Car, which is actually, for that type of warfare, a pretty effective little vehicle. 6.5 tons, 15 rounds of 90 mil ammunition. The heat round would take out a T-55 if you hit it in the right spot. 6.5 ton four-wheeled armored vehicle, can go 50 mile an hour. Got a great range, can go nearly everywhere. A lot of firepower in a small package.
Yeah.
And the South Africans especially used them to great effect during their wars afterwards against the Cubans and Cuban supplied forces that they went up against. So that took in June and July.
Tell me about Operation Miracle.
Operation Miracle. So during while I was doing the Elan 90 Armored Car course, so that's June and July of 79. In June of 79, Muammar Gaddafi sent 10 T-54/T-55 tanks on the French transport ship called the Astor, A-S-T-O-R, around the Cape of Good Hope.
Astor.
They
didn't make it Tor ass.
It's French. It's French. You know the French.
Touche.
And as the ship was going around the Cape of Good Hope, they were being sent to Idi Amin in Uganda, and Uganda was going through a civil war at that time. People had finally gotten tired of Idi Amin's antics and were trying to overthrow him. And he got on a plane and fled Uganda to the Middle East. I believe he ended up in the UAE, I think, for the rest of his life. Converted to Mohammedanism, and spent out the remainder of his days living, I guess, in luxury in I'm pretty sure it was the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Anyhow, so while the ship is rounding the Cape of Good Hope, all of a sudden they've got no place to go and deliver their cargo. They pull into Durban, South Africa, on the Indian Ocean. South Africans get wind of what's on board, so they seize the cargo. They keep 2 of the tanks, what are called the command and control tanks, for their purposes, evaluation purposes, and they send the other 8 tanks to us in Rhodesia, to the Armored Car Regiment, and these form the nucleus of a new squadron called E Squadron, which was 8 T-54/55 tanks. And they were originally Polish-built tanks that Poland had traded to Libya in the mid-70s in an arms for oil deal back then. So the Poles gave them all their T-54s, which had been modified for African service, hence the designation T-54/55, because they were originally 54s with T-55 features.
Okay.
So unbeknownst to us, while we're doing the Eland course, these tanks arrive and are sent up to Nkomo Barracks, which is about an hour's drive north out of Salisbury, now Harare. And they're creating this tank park for us, which we don't know about. So in August, late July, early August, we had done a bush trip with the Elands out into the northeast border area, relatively uneventful trip. Not much happening. We did a lot of driving, saw a lot of great, interesting scenery. And then back we go to barracks, and Major Winkler came to us. He's now a major. And he said, we picked a group of people, and you're going to be going on this course. You can't say anything about it. He said you should be honored to be a part of it. We think we picked the best. And it was only regular soldiers that were picked for this course to learn about the T-55. So here we are up at Nkomo Barracks, north of, we're staying out there all the time. We got a big marquee tent set up. We've got our own individual tents, and we're staying there full time, learning how to operate and run the T-54s, T-55s. We're trained as the driver, as the gunner, the loader, and the command. They always trained you in every position because manpower. Yeah. So my favorite slot on that thing was the loader's position, because you got to man the 12,7 DSHKT machine gun on top of the turret, which was in a marvelous elevation and traverse mechanism. And my understanding was the U.S. copied this mechanism for their vehicles.
Okay.
It's on a ring gear that rotates 360. It's got a spring hydraulically controlled elevation traverse. So it just responds like, it's amazing how, and you've got a trigger activated, like a motorcycle clutch to activate all the controls and fire the gun. It was pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah. So that was my favorite position. Anyhow, Winkler shows up one day. Well, we're going through this course. This would be, I'm going to say, mid-September, and says, you're going to be dropping your training, going back to Salisbury, get all your combat kit and gear. He says, you can't talk about this, but once again, he said, you should be honored that we picked you to go on this, to do what you're about to do. And to do what we were about to do was take part in Operation Miracle, which was at the time, the largest combined operations cross-border raid that the Rhodesians had conducted. And the Rhodesians had conducted some incredibly successful cross-border raids where they had literally killed 1,200 at a time for no casualties at all.
Wow.
In some of these raids. They were textbook examples of, I mean, we don't have the time to get into them, but anyone who's a historian of this conflict, these raids are still used in training to this day.
1,200
to 1.
1,200 to 1?
Yes. And probably the most incredible one was the Selous Scouts raid on the Nyadzanya Pangui base camp in Mozambique, which was just a short distance away from where we were going on what is now known as Operation Miracle. And in that raid, the Selous Scouts had disguised their vehicles to look like Frelimo. Frelimo was the name of the government in Mozambique at the time, and their army was known as the Frelimo forces, or we called them Freddies, but Frelimo was the proper name. The Selous Scouts had disguised their vehicles to be painted like Frelimo vehicles, and they're mounted. There was half a dozen or more vehicles that were mounted with twin 50 cal Brownings, 12,7 DSHKs, all kinds of MAGs, and they literally drove onto the parade square where thousands of Zanla were lined up on parade, flying the Frelimo flag and shouting through a bullhorn, comrades, we have important information for you. And I believe the estimate was 4,000 to 5,000 on the parade square at the time. And when the Selous Scouts opened up at point blank range, aerial photography showed over 900 dead on the parade square. and you can add to that 3 times that number wounded.
Jeez.
And took them out in one devastating sucker punch that was almost brought Zanla to its knees, actually.
And these were rebel fighters?
These were in various stages of training at this Nyadzanya Pungwi base.
Wow.
And the Selous Scouts managed to get in there and, man, just
that'd almost be a hard thing to do, even to my enemy.
I have read, there's some very good books written about the war, Selous Scouts Top Secret War being one of them, where the raid is described in great detail.
Yeah.
And there were some American veterans serving in the Selous Scouts at the time that took part in this raid and were a very important part of it.
What were some of the attacks that those Freddies were doing? Were they attacking?
No, so the Frelimo government was propping up Mugabe's Zanla forces.
Okay.
So they were being trained in Mozambique and then infiltrating back into Rhodesia at the time through the eastern border area.
Okay.
And so they were propping them up.
Mm-hmm.
If the Rhodesians came into Mozambique to conduct raids, a lot of the times the Frelimo forces would just, stand back and let them do what they were doing. But in many cases, they did not. And later on in the war, in the last 5 years or so, they actually became very, very aggressive for any Rhodesian forces infiltrating into their country, and made for some pretty difficult times for guys in the Special Air Service and the Selous Scouts who got discovered while they were doing cross-border operations. So we find out we were confined to barracks at KG6, couldn't go out, couldn't do anything, couldn't tell anybody about what's going on. And we're prepping our elands. I believe we took 9 elands. We prepped them all up, bound them all up. They were notoriously stingy with giving you gear and equipment and ammo. This time they were throwing it at us like, here you go. You need more ammo. You need more explosive, more 90 mil rounds.
How'd that make you feel?
We kind of thought, we're going somewhere. We're doing something different this time. Then we took all that stuff up to the Selous Scout barracks up at Nkomo, and they bring us into the Selous Scout workshops, which was totally off base or forbidden for anybody to ever go in. Nobody ever go into the Selous Scouts barracks unless you were a Selous Scout.
Mm-hmm.
So now we knew something really big was up.
Yeah.
And they paint our elands Frelimo green. So we're all like, okay, we're going cross-border. We know now. We know for sure we're going cross-border. And I've got a photograph that shows the workshop area with belted ammunition laid out to be put into all the boxes and containers and whatnot. And there's literally tens of thousands of rounds of belted ammunition there laid out on the ground to get packaged up and put on the vehicles. Selous Scouts had some really interesting vehicles. They had one that we were married up with on our part of the battle. It had twin aircraft Browning 50 caliber M3 machine guns. So those are about 1,200 rounds a minute.
Wow.
They got a short ventilated barrel. And when they would fire them off, after they would stop firing, all you would hear was like a cascading waterfall of brass tinkling down to the bottom of the steel hull of the vehicle. And it just seemed to go on for seconds and seconds after they stopped firing. Incredibly devastating piece of equipment in action. So at the last moment, they tell us what we're doing. We're going to go into Mozambique through the northeastern border area near the town of Umtali. We're going to take old logging roads, and then we're going to get on the main road that leads from Chimoio northward to the new camp, again called Chimoio, not too far from the original Nyadzanya Pungwi camp. And we're going to be attacking this new Chimoio camp for Operation Miracle. Now, because they had learned the hard way about concentrating your men and material in a small area, they'd begun to disperse their camps over wide areas. So this camp was about 64 square miles in size.
Wow.
And was
Real big.
64 square miles, yeah. And there were two dominating hill features that were mutually supporting one another with embedded anti-aircraft guns of all different shapes, sizes, and colors. And I swear to this day that I saw flak exploding off the wingtip of a Rhodesian Air Force Hawker Hunter jet as it pulled out of an attack dive onto these emplacements and climbed up in the air. I swear I saw flak exploding off the wingtip, which means, if I've done my research correctly, the only comm block anti-aircraft weapon at the time that had a fuse type of ordnance on it that would explode, or proximity fuse, I think was a 57 millimeter anti-aircraft gun or larger. Anything smaller than that, like your 23 mils or 20 mils or 14.5s, 12.7s, they didn't have that type of warhead in them. So they had big stuff in there.
Yeah.
And they were dropping 1,000-pound bombs on these guys. I was less than a kilometer away from them as they were going off. And it's all rock. It's hard rock in that part of Mozambique. And the ground was literally like someone's underneath your feet with a sledgehammer, slamming on the soles of your feet. And then that massive shockwave in the air as it reaches you.
Yeah.
It was, wow. I can't imagine being near to that on the ground. I can't imagine.
Yeah, being the one they were shooting them at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we get everything bombed up. We get in this. So there's supposedly about 12,000 to 14,000 Zanla guerrillas in various stages of training in this camp when we went into it, or when we're going to attack it. That was what they said. Whether they're right, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But in total, and there were about 300 Rhodesian soldiers. So we had Selous Scouts were leading the operation. Then the armored cars were backing them up with the armor. We had Rhodesian artillery with World War II 25-pounders to back us up from a base that they had secured called Madison Square. It was named after a brand of cigarettes that Rhodesians smoked.
Okay.
It was on the way in to attack the camp. The artillery guys set up their equipment there, and they were about, I'm going to say 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers, so probably 10, 15 miles away from the base in Chimoio that we were attacking. And it was really great, man. They had everything laid out, pre-planned, tables of fire for every possible location that they anticipated they might have to fire on at the Chimoio base camp. It was all laid down. So all they'd have to say is, that who's ever calling in a strike would get their location. They'd locate it on them. Now, this is all long before GPS. We're doing old school topographic map and universal grids, universal transverse Mercator grids, all that kind of stuff. But everything pre-planned so they could be on target real quick. And thank God, because it became very important at parts of this raid. So we were delayed a few days because of bad weather that was obscuring targets on the ground, which meant the Air Force could not strike targets because, again, there's no modern precision-guided weapons back then. It's all eyeball, on the target, dropping ordnance. So while we were waiting to go across the border, the Rhodesians had to do some fake fire force operations. And in one of these fake fire force operations, the K car that had the Major Snellgar, the aircraft pilot and technician, The three of them were killed in this Alouette 3 crash. They hit a cable that was not marked on their maps, and it brought the aircraft down and killed all three of them. So this is the first casualties of Operation Miracle, and there were several more to come. Anyhow, weather clears up. We're formed up on an airfield with this armored column. The airfield was called Ruda Airstrip, RUDA. And at the start of the morning, as we're warming up our engines, ready to go, this flight of a Diamond 4 plus 1 formation of Canberra bombers, old school 1950s era technology used in the Vietnam War for reconnaissance by the American forces. This Diamond 1 formation flies low overhead over top of us, heads off towards the target, off, way, way off in the distance over the horizon. And then a short time later, we heard the explosions of the bombs dropping, and everybody lets out this huge cheer, fist pumping, and off we go. And we immediately get into difficulty crossing over into Mozambique. We're supposed to cross over at the Hondi River, and they couldn't find a suitable crossing point, so it was soft bottom mud, and they had to tow us across with a great big D8 Cat bulldozer.
Yep.
Every vehicle had to get towed across, so that cut down into the timings, because we were supposed to be there within a couple of hours of the Canberras dropping their bombs, and we weren't. We didn't actually roll up till late in the afternoon of the day. And then the armored column split into two groups. One group went up one path of the main road into the camp. Our group went up another path, leading to a slightly different area, but still in the main camp area, in the shadow of these huge dominating hill features, of which there are two. One running north-south, yeah, and the other one to its east, a smaller feature, but equally as high. I have photos of them actually in this show and tell part, but and they're providing mutually interlocked supporting fire for any aircraft that comes within range. So we're in there. We get in late afternoon. And the path or the trail we go up, it's a fairly solid trail. It's like a dirt road, I would call it. Pretty a fair bit of trees and vegetation, not jungle, and not scrub.
Okay.
And we start encountering trenches, like zigzag trenches alongside the roadway, and then there's a 12,7 in one of the trenches, just with the muzzle sticking out. And the next thing I know, we're into the
body man in it.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, at this point in time, one of the Slough scouts was killed. And I'm trying to remember his Gert O'Neill was his name. Gert O'Neill. And he was killed by a fragment of metal that pierced the back of his skull. I don't think it was a bullet. I just think it was a fragment that hit him in the wrong spot. And so we pull up alongside him as he's laying next to this trench. And there's a Slough Scout officer who's treating him completely exposed out in the open. There's a 12,7 just 50 yards away. There's I would say it was a Portuguese MG3 relic. No, MG3, German machine gun. That's good machine gun. And I would say it would have been at the time the Portuguese were using 7.92 as opposed to 7.62 NATO in their belt-fed machine guns. So there's one of those there. So I'm the gunner in the Eland. So I got my periscope grandstand view of all this stuff, and I can check things out with the gun scope. And my commander is Ash Bauer, great guy, Rhodesian guy. And he's like, Dave, start laying down covering fire into those trenches. So we've got the wounded Slough Scout on the left side of our vehicle. We're trying to cover him with it as best we can. And I'm like popping rounds through my coax Browning machine gun just into the open parts of the trenches all along. And at first I'm laying in bursts of 10, 15 rounds, and the Eland carried 3,000 rounds of 7.62 NATO ammo, which is a fair bit.
Yeah. You have some fun with that.
And Ash is like, Dave, slow down. You're going to use up all the ammo. So, okay. So now I'm like, you can fire off individual rounds with this thing because the rate of fire of the Browning is pretty slow.
Mm-hmm.
So you could just tap, tap, tap. And I'm back and forth doing this. And all of a sudden, right in front of out of the trench in front of us, I see this arm rise up with an RPK Soviet machine gun with 40-round box magazine. 40-round box magazine. RPKs were not too common.
Mm-hmm.
And he puts it on our side of the trench. And then I see the two hands reach up like this, and he pushes himself up. He's wearing a white tank top T-shirt, long, lanky, I'll use the term, we refer to them as either gooks or turs. So I'm going to call him a gook. We called them gooks. It was easier to say than tur.
Tur?
Tur.
Okay.
Tur, short for terrorist.
Oh.
Turs. So this gook pushes himself up, man, and he's like 6'3", lean, lanky, got a white tank top on. He's got shorts like mine, khaki shorts. And then he stands full up and he's got a freaking big afro. And one of the interesting things is you did not see Africans with afros.
Really?
Nope. They kept them cut short, or they did. I don't know how they did it, but you would very rare to see a rural African with a fro, what we would call a fro. This guy had a fro. It was a big fro. It was like Artis Gilmore type of fro. And so I've swung my Browning to the right of him, and I'm coming back as he picks up his RPK, and he just starts striding parallel to the trench. And as I come back, I catch him. And I always remember I was 1 and 3. I think we had loaded our belts with a tracer instead of 1 and 5 as we normally would. And I remember seeing a tracer burn its way through his fro, and I caught him square in the noggin, and he went right down. He just dropped into the trench. And there was another Selous scout, an African Selous scout, right beside the spot. I don't know why he didn't start just shooting with the RPK, because he would have taken out Gert O'Neill, the guy that was tending to him, the other African scout that was beside the trench. But anyhow, he drops into the trench. The African Selous scout throws an M962 on top of him. End of story. That guy's out of the question. So now I'm thinking there must be more guys in there. So I'm looking at the 12,7 through the scope, and the MG3, and I'm like, all right, you could snipe with that setup. It was rigidly mounted into the coax with the main gun, and honestly, that thing was dead on accurate, way out to 1,000 meters easily. So I'm like, I start putting rounds into the breech block, not the breech block, but the breech of the 12,7, and I shoot up the breech in the top cover, rendering that one useless. And then I turn my attention onto the MG3, do the same thing to the MG3. So I put those two guns out of commission. And finally, we get control of the trench line, and it's nightfall. But they get Gert O'Neill out of there, and he gets taken to a Kazabak helicopter, flown back to Salisbury, but he was dead. I remember Ash Bauer looking out the side of the vehicle, and he came back in and he said, he doesn't look good, he's gray, so anyhow, that was day one.
How many days was
5 days.
Wow.
5 days.
Nice.
And I don't think I slept. Zach caught the odd little cap nap.
Yeah.
So
for 5 days.
For 5 days. Yeah. So the next morning we were tasked to go out and take out one of the aircraft gun emplacements on the smaller hill, the adjacent hill to the main terrain feature, which they called Monte Cassino. Don't ask me why. World War II battle. Monte
That's
Cassino.
where my head goes.
Yeah. That's what they called it, Monte Cassino. So we're tasked to take out the gun emplacements on the smaller hill feature. And our armored car had one issue. When it was hot, if you stalled it or shut it off, you had to wait 5 minutes before it would start again.
Uh-oh.
I think it was a coil issue. I think the coil overheated, or maybe the starter solenoid, one of the two. So we're with a bunch of Selous Scouts line abreast, and these are Selous Scouts from the Selous Scout Assault Group, which was a different element of the Selous Scouts people don't often think of, but they had, like, I would call them, they were their stormtrooper element.
Okay.
They were the guys when they were going to do something like this raid, would be the assault element that would, they didn't have camouflage on. They didn't have the hair, and when I mean face camouflage.
Okay.
They didn't have the beards and the long hair, although they were scruffy and unkempt in some regards, because they would do both duties too, but they were the assault element, and that's why they were called Assault Group. So they're in line abreast with us, and we're on Bear Rock hillside, and we're cresting over the top of this hill feature, which is putting us in full view of the main Monte Cassino. And I was like, I don't think this is a good idea. And I'm the gunner. I'm not the commander, and I'm looking out the side scope on my side. I see a line of Selous Scouts out there. On the other side, there's another line of Selous Scouts abreast with us. As we just crest over the hill, they open up on us with 20 mil cannons. We later found out it was a multi-barreled 20 mil cannon that was being towed by a vehicle. At the time, we couldn't discover exactly where it was because it was hidden in the overgrowth or the underbrush. But Ashbauer tells the driver to stop. Our driver is a 17-year-old kid by the name of Roland Murray, by the way, 17 years old. Yeah. And he's probably taller than you. And the driver's compartment in an Eland is tiny, and literally his knees were around his ears, and he's huddled in this little compartment. So Ash tells him to stop and back up. Well, as he lets the clutch out to back up, stalls the vehicle. So now I know, countdown.
You're
5 minutes.
5 minutes, yeah.
5 minutes. And I'm looking through my gunner scope, and I'm looking through the periscopes, and I'm seeing the tracers coming at us. And some of them were, I think, armor-piercing incendiary, because they were hitting the rocks, and they were making very nice explosions on the rocks as they hit the rocks. Some of them were just tracer. You could see the trace element as it came by, green trace. And I'm looking at the Selous Scouts who had gone prone beside us, and they're on Bear Rock in full view. And I'm seeing these things whizzing over their heads with an inch to spare as they're laying there. So I'm looking through the scope. I'm trying to follow the tracer back to its point of origin, but they don't start burning until they're far enough away that you can't really do that.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I'm trying to imagine, where's that line from that where I first see the tracer? Where's it coming from? And I'm looking at my, there's a reticle pattern. If I remember correctly, it went up to 2,200 meters. So I'm like, that's more than 2,200 meters away. It's got to be. So I said, Ash, give me a HE round. And so Ash loads a 90 mil high explosive round into the cannon. And I lay my cursor on where I think in my mind it's coming from. And I fire. And even at 2,200 meters, it's falling way short. And the fire is still coming at us. It hits our vehicle. And Roland Murray, the driver, he was so tall that when he was holding the wheel, his elbow was up against the side door. It hit the side door and injured his elbow, 20 mil round. And I heard him scream. And I'm like, damn, I got to find this. So I've still got more elevation left on the gun, but I have no more reticle left on my. So now I'm imagining I'm imagining in my head, okay, and I'm firing towards the main Monte Cassino feature. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to wild ass guess this, Kentucky windage, elevation, the whole 9 yards. I lay the gun. I fire another round. I'm following the tracer of the gun because the rounds have tracer. The 90 mil rounds have tracer, and I'm following it, and I see it arc up nicely, and it explodes up on top of Monte Cassino. I'm like, okay, I got to be near the right spot, man. I'm laying on hitting Monte Cassino, so I do another little adjustment, send another one off, and at this time I hear the incoming 20 mil. It hits something up on the roof of the armored vehicle, and what it hit was the chain that secures the anti-aircraft Browning on the top of the vehicle, and severed the chain on that. So I'm watching my final round go out, and it hits where I'm hoping it's going to hit, but again, it's not. We're not doing rocket science here. I'm like wild ass guessing it. I see a big orange flash when it goes off. Firing stops, and so we used up our 5 minutes now. Roland hits the starter button, fires up. We back off the hill, and scouts follow with us because the firing stopped now. Turned out later on, we found out that these guys were not up on Monte Cassino. They were in the little valley below us. And what had happened was there was a Selous Scouts group down near them, and when I started firing off a cannon, the rounds are going over their heads, and they got scared thinking we were homing in on them, and they gapped it with the vehicle and the multi-barreled cannon. But they left all their ammo and equipment behind. They had cases and cases of 20 mil stuff. So that's day 2. We, on day 3, the morning of day 3, Daryl Winkler takes his support troop infantry, which I'm not part of. And I gotta tell this part of the story, Zach, because, a lot of Rhodesians didn't like Daryl Winkler because he got a command position. He's American. That immediately raises hackles on, other Rhodesian-born guys who think they should have that job, right? Yeah. But he was put in there in that position and, did the best with it. So Winkler takes his support troop infantry up the backside of Monte Cassino, and they debus from their vehicles and they start making their way up to the top. Well, there's more mutually supporting guns from other hillside features they didn't know about, and they open up on them, pin them down. They're forced to retreat, but in the process, while they're pinned down, Daryl, now in our Elands, we had 2 radios. We had a 25-watt radio and a 5-watt intertroop radio. So with the 25-watt radio, you could hear everything that's going on from all the participating units and elements. We could hear the artillery guys back at Madison Square telling on their radio frequency. We could hear everyone. We could hear the command Dakota that's circling over top, directing the battle. Daryl Winkler, while they're pinned down under heavy fire, and several guys have been wounded, he calls in airstrikes from the Rhodesian hunter jets with pinpoint accuracy under heavy fire in the calmest language and proper voice procedure you could ever imagine. When they expended their ordnance, he then called in mortar fire from the Rhodesian Light Infantry's support commando unit, which had mobile mortars mounted on trucks on a turntable apparatus where they could just revolve them about in the bed of the truck and fire wherever they had to fire. Had all their ammunition in the truck. He started calling in that fire and adjusting it calmly, coolly, professionally, like he'd been doing it all his life. Then when they had to cool down their tubes, he calls in the 25-pounders from Madison Square from 15 kilometers away. Same thing again. And then the hunters are back. They've rearmed and rebombed, and they come back in, and now they're doing gun runs with their cannons. And, it was, in my opinion, one of the most incredible examples of leadership under fire that you could ever imagine. Wow. And the Rhodesians never gave him the credit for it that he deserved. He should have gotten a medal for that. He really should have. Long story short, they're able to get back off of Monte Cassino. They left a couple of guys behind, one of whom was Paul Richardson, who I told you about earlier at the SAS, who ended up in the Armored Car Regiment too. And Daryl Sumter, who was an American lieutenant who had joined the Armored Car Regiment. I don't think Daryl was a Vietnam veteran, but he was a U.S. Army officer who had come to Rhodesia. I was in contact with him not too many years ago. So later on in the night, Daryl and Paul returned to where we were camped in the headquarters element within the base. In the middle of the night, they had managed to hide and come back under cover of darkness. Richardson got shrapnel in the ass, which we all thought was a great place for him to be shot.
That $1 million wound.
And he's sent out of the battle, and basically we never see him again because he gapped it out of the Rhodesian Army after that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so that's Wednesday. Wednesday night, Sumter and Richardson come back. Now in the middle of the night, this kind of, it was almost like you could feel it as opposed to hear it, but this kind of hue and cry. So at nighttime, we're set up in an all-round defensive posture with 360-degree infantry guys out around the vehicles, everybody doing 4 hours on, 4 hours off routines, and you could hear the fear. You could smell it or sense it somehow. And over the radio, we start hearing tanks, tanks, tanks. And all the guys, you can hear them, you can feel them panicking. All the guys in the 360 perimeter are like panicking, tanks. And then we're starting to hear them. So Frelimo had sent 6, I like to say they were T-54s because I looked at the track pattern later on in the morning. And because we'd been training on the T-54s, I recognized the pattern and the width of the pattern, whereas T-34's got a different tread and a different track width.
Okay.
So in the middle of the night, Frelimo sends 6 tanks in to disrupt our attack on the camp. And they've got a bunch of infantry in armored infantry-carrying vehicles following up behind them. And overhead commander and the big command Dakota is still flying overhead, and he details Winkler with his 2.5, the Unimog, with the 50 cal Browning in the back, with Mike Reb Pierce. Mike, who wrote this book, if you're still out there, I hope you can see this. Yeah, and I'll hope you...
What's the name of it?
It's called African Days, Hollywood Nights.
Yeah, by Michael Pierce.
Yeah. Mike is in the back manning the Browning 50 cal M2. And Daryl's got his, we called them Winkler's Wankers because we were all jealous of the guys that got to crew on his 2.5 because it was sort of like, they were the elite, right? And Winkler picked them all personally. So they lead our troop of 3 Elans down the path that we have come up in from the main road. The Frelimo are coming from the south, northwards on the main road to the main camp road, and we're going out to meet them in the middle of the night. No night vision equipment whatsoever. We've got an illuminated reticle on our gun scopes in the Eland. We're going off to meet them at the crossroads. At the crossroads was an RLI stop group. And
what is an RLI stop?
So Rhodesian Light Infantry was also part of Operation Miracle.
Okay.
But they were doing things like manning stop groups surrounding the outer perimeter of the camp on a widely dispersed area in anticipation that people in the camp would try and escape and head in their direction where they could cut them down, which they did actually, it did actually happen that way to not as well as they had hoped, but they did catch quite a number escaping. So they're in this RLI stop. They've got this stop group. They're hidden in the brush at the crossroads. And again, the feature of having the 2 radios in the Elands is you can hear all this traffic between them, the overhead Dakota, the artillery guys back at Madison Square, and you can hear the tanks coming up the main road. So we stop about probably 200 meters from the crossroad. and where we've got our only line of fire is directly down that path. So we got our vehicles on either side of the path. We've got our guns pointed down the path. I had to send my crew commander, Ash Bauer, out there with a cigarette when I could lay the cursor on where he had the cigarette in order to, it's that black.
Wow.
And now our heads are out of the hatches and we're listening and we're hearing things going on, and you hear the tanks at night is a scary thing to hear. It really
I bet.
It's a scary thing to hear. Yeah. The RLI stop group radios to the artillery guys at Madison Square. They've got all these positions we call it pre-programming now, but laid out in their firing range tables, all of them laid out. They call in fire on the tanks as they're moving up to the crossroad. Within 6 rounds in the middle of the night, using World War II equipment with no night vision or GPS, they're on target. Nice. 6 rounds. The tanks stop. And they do this mad, I'll call it a 360-degree thing of mad fire, firing all the guns that they've got on those 6 tanks.
In every direction.
In every direction, including some which
at each other.
Well, not yet, but I'm surprised they didn't.
Yeah.
So these rounds they're going right over our head. I mean, they're treetop level.
Okay.
But what they were, I think, firing at was the main hill feature of Monte Cassino, thinking that that's where we were. Mm-hmm. That's what I think they were doing. And in the meantime, this RLI officer who's manning the stop group, he's adjusting the fire from the artillery. They're on target in 6 rounds. They hit one, damages it, doesn't destroy it. And the Freddies stop firing and turn around, and they start heading back towards Chimoio, where they came from. So first light, we stay where we are. First light, command element in the DC-3 overhead says to Winkler, go after him. And as the morning is beginning to break, we're following the tracks south down the main road towards Chimoio. And this is where I can see that in my mind, they were T-54, 55s, which they had been supplied with by Cuba at the time. And we're chasing after them. And we've got this Lynx, it's a twin boom, push-pull Cessna. They were used in Vietnam. I think trying to remember what they call them. Bird dogs, maybe okay. Bird dog. It's an engine in front and an engine behind. It's got twin booms. Could carry a lot of equipment. They mounted them with machine guns and rockets actually in the Rhodesian Army, and they were quite effective. It's flying overhead of us at telephone pole top level, like zooming by, trying to get a bird's eye view of these tanks as we're closing in on them. And we kind of break out into this open area. And I remember Darrell Winkler has his 2.5 stop. And I see him pointing to Reb. And I think he's talking to Reb on their inter-unit radio, which we also have as well. And he says, they're over there under that tree line. And this is where I get to this story about Mike Pierce, the author of that book, not including this part of the story in the book because he'd forgotten about it. And Mike opens up on where Darrell thinks the tanks are with his M2 Browning. And just as he's doing that, the sun breaks through and this shaft of light spotlights him like he's on stage as a musician when he was in the band, as he's opening up with M2. And I still, in my mind, I have this fantastic image of Mike bathed in the morning sunlight, banging away with the M2 Browning at a group of T-54 tanks about probably 500 meters away. I'd say the tree line was maybe about that distance. However, in the process, he attracts return fire from them, and they start shredding the trees over top of our heads. And I'm getting pissed at Reb, and I'm like, if he doesn't stop firing with that Browning, I'm going to shoot him. But
before they shoot me.
Yeah, before they get us. Anyhow, finally, Big Cheese in the overhead DAC tells us to turn around, raid's over. We're going back to Rhodesia, which is what we do. We head back. It took about a day to get out of the country. The Freddies followed us, and they actually went to the main camp that we had been attacking. And late at night, we saw them from a few kilometers away pour almost unimaginable amount of fire onto that hilltop feature that you could ever, you'd wonder, where the heck did they get all this ammo and main gun ammunition that they can burn up? And they saturated that feature, thinking we were still there, I guess. But, we're on the way back by this time. So we make our way back.
What was the BDA? What was the battle damage? Did y'all take the whole thing over? Was it, we've killed 800?
Well, because it was so widely dispersed.
That's a huge base.
It's huge.
That's unimaginable. With 300 people, 64 miles.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it. It's too much.
No. I think in total there might have been 200-300 bodies counted.
Okay.
But
considered a win.
Not really.
Really?
Well, first you have the crash of the helicopter at the beginning of the operation with Major Snellgar and the two pilots, or the pilot and technician killed. You can't replace those.
Yeah.
They're not able to do that. Then after we're on our way back into Rhodesia, the Air Force attacks them, that column that was following us, attacks that column with a Canberra bomber group again. One of the Canberra bombers gets shot down with the loss of the crew. Bodies never recovered. Aircraft never recovered. And then a Hunter jet goes in at the same column again, and it gets shot down as it's making a gun run. So now they've lost 3 aircraft they cannot afford to lose. There literally was a half a dozen Canberra bombers in the Air Force, 10 or 12 Hunter jets.
Yeah.
They can't afford to lose, and the aircrew too, because replacing them is almost impossible. So no, in terms of the net expenditure, number of enemy kills, maybe some disruption to their training program. I don't think it. I don't know.
Wasn't the outcome you were going for?
No, they were used to having thousands dead on the battle on these camp attacks, right?
With nothing in return.
Nothing in return.
And the anti-air guns fucked y'all up pretty good, huh?
Oh yeah, and those guys, you know what? They knew what they're doing.
Yeah,
they mutually supporting, interlocked fields of fire, man. Any aircraft that came down to attack those hill features were getting shot up the rear by the other hill feature.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, back to Salisbury, hand in all our kit, back to training on the tanks again. That carries on until the election period in March of 1980, where now the ceasefire was declared in December of 1980 on paper.
Yeah.
On paper.
It always happens there first.
On paper. Then during the actual election period in March of 1980, which ultimately ended up with Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF winning the election, we were part of what was termed Operation Quartz. And if you Google that up, and this has been a very divisive issue within the ranks of ex-Rhodesian servicemen, we all thought that it was going to be a coup against Mugabe and Nkomo, now that they had gathered their forces within the country in these assembly points. And as part of the E Squadron, we were tasked to go with Bob McKenzie, Major McKenzie, and his squadron of SAS soldiers to attack the Zanla and Zipra hierarchy, who were being billeted in the University of Rhodesia's audiovisual building. So we trained with them to attack these buildings. We thought that this was a sure thing. It was going to happen, that these guys would never get into power. What we didn't realize was, we were leaping to conclusions. Mm. In hindsight, the operation was to ensure that no matter what the outcome, all the participants had to accept it, and if they didn't, then they would be attacked. But not the coup that we thought it was going to be. In our minds, we thought it was going to be a coup, Hail Mary right at the end of the game, and we were so bitterly disappointed when it didn't happen that way. And the end result was the next March 4th, the Ides of March, beware the Ides of March. Robert Mugabe is declared the winner of the Commonwealth Monitoring Force supervised elections. He and ZANU-PF, the political party that was the political wing of the ZANLA military forces, take power in Rhodesia and never relinquish it until he dies, about 8 years ago or so, if I remember correctly. He and his party enriching themselves at the expense of the people of Zimbabwe, the Povo, and become filthy rich as a result. And I think things are better there now than they were. It's 2 generations removed now.
Okay.
So the newer generation, even if they're born into the ZANU-PF family, they probably have a little different outlook on things now than, say, their predecessors did. But it's interesting because Mugabe and ZANU-PF was a classic example in the modern era of what happens when you think you can print money without anything to back it up.
Surely nobody does that anymore.
No, I can't imagine anyone doing that. Not in the last few years, anyhow.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So now it's I've got a choice. The new regime said to the regular forces soldiers, you can carry on serving in the new Zimbabwe National Army, or you can sign paperwork, get out of your contracts without financial penalty, and adios, amigos. So I chose the latter, and I got out of my contract, and I headed off to South Africa to join the South African Defense Force, who at the time was taking every ex-Rhodesian they could get a hold of, and went to the recruiting depot in Pretoria. They said, yep, we'll take you. Go back to your hotel, get your stuff, show up here, Monday or whatever it was. I went back to my hotel room, made the mistake of phoning home. No.
Is that the first time that you had called home?
No, I had a few conversations about 6 months into being over there.
Okay.
Some with my ex-girlfriend, some with family. But this time I was feeling a little bit low because of what happened, with the outcome. In the first 2 years were honeymoon for the new Zimbabwe, as they called it after the creation of Zimbabwe in May of 1980.
Yeah.
But anyhow, got homesick, decided to come home, and never really went back to war again.
Was there any perception? I remember like when the Vietnam guys came home, there was a lot of public perception, and it was none of it good. Did you tell people that you had fought over there? What was the take?
Well,
did they understand the war? Not a lot of Americans, I think, know much about it.
No, majority of people accepted the left-wing view of the conflict, that it was a justified conflict, justified war by ZANLA and ZIPRA against their colonial masters, and that was, what probably the majority of people thought. But it was a much more nuanced
a lot
conflict.
More to it. Very complex.
Much more to it than that. Yeah. I mean, 250,000 total Europeans, and that was pretty much the European population of Zimbabwe from colonial days to the new Zimbabwe, cannot lord over 9 million Africans. It's not possible.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how brutal or bad you are not going to keep 9 million people down. There were a lot of supporters of the old regime amongst the African population. And that was clearly represented by the number of Africans who volunteered to join one of the oldest regiments in the Rhodesian security forces, which was the Rhodesian African Rifles, and a very, very tough, competent, disciplined group of men you will never find anywhere. So, yeah, there's lots more stuff, but anyhow, it's truly been an honor.
We'll cover it.
Yeah,
at dinner.
It's been, I'm still pinching myself to believe that this is actually real and I'm here and that you guys contacted me, and I can't thank you enough. And I just want to say thank you to all of my ex-Rhodesian comrades, those of you still out there. I hope your lives are going well. And yeah, can't thank you all enough yeah. And Austin is fantastic.
Good. I'm glad you're having fun.
Enjoying it very much so.
Good
Yeah.
deal. Thank you, Dave.
All right, buddy.
Appreciate
Cheers.
it.
Yeah. Thank you.